Have you ever looked at a royal portrait and wondered what stories are hidden behind the paint? We see kings and queens, draped in jewels and power. But what if the most important story is the one that was deliberately erased? What if I told you that one of the most powerful royal families in the world, the British royal family, has a secret they've been hiding in plain sight for over 200 years? This isn't just a rumor, it's a story backed by historical accounts, by portraits, and by a paper trail that historians have spent centuries trying to bury. It's a truth that could shatter the very foundation of an empire. A story about the woman whose blood runs through the veins of every living British royal today. Her name was Queen Charlotte, and this is the story they never wanted you to know. To understand this incredible story, we need to peel back the layers of official history. If you walk into the royal collection today, you'll find dozens of portraits of Queen Charlotte. She was the wife of King George III, the grandmother of Queen Victoria, and the direct ancestor of the late Queen Elizabeth II and the current King Charles III. But as you look at these paintings, something strange becomes clear. They don't all look like the same person. In some early portraits, you see a woman with distinctly African features, a broad nose, full lips, and a darker complexion, but in later portraits, she appears completely European. Her features become narrower, her skin lighter. It's as if she was whitewashed with each new painting. Now, you might be thinking, isn't that just artistic interpretation? But this wasn't an accident. This was policy, a real-life royal scandal that's been hidden for centuries. To grasp the enormity of this, let's go back to 1761. Britain is at the peak of its colonial power. The transatlantic slave trade is generating obscene wealth for British merchants. Ships leave Liverpool and Bristol loaded with goods, sail to West Africa to buy enslaved people, then cross to the Caribbean and American colonies to sell those human beings for sugar, tobacco, and cotton. This brutal triangle of trade is making Britain the richest empire on earth. And in this exact moment, when Britain's economy is literally built on the enslavement of black people, the young King George III chooses his bride. Her name is Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a 17-year-old German princess from a tiny, insignificant duchy most people had never heard of. She speaks no English, and, according to multiple historical sources from her own time, she has African ancestry. This is where it gets truly fascinating. Charlotte's family tree traces back 9 generations to a Portuguese noblewoman from the 15th century named Margarida de Castro e Souza. Now, Portugal in the 1500s wasn't like other European countries for centuries. Much of the Iberian Peninsula, which includes Portugal and Spain, had been occupied by the Moors, North African Muslims who ruled for over 700 years. During this long period, extensive mixing occurred between the African Moors and the Portuguese nobility. It wasn't just common, it was inevitable. By the 16th century, the Portuguese royal family itself had significant Moorish, meaning North African, meaning black ancestry running through multiple family lines. And Margarida de Castro e Souza, Charlotte's ancestor, was descended directly from King Alfonso III of Portugal and his mistress, Madrigana, who many historians now believe was a Moorish noblewoman. That African blood passed down through 9 generations, a quiet but persistent genetic thread, until it reached a teenage girl in a small German duchy who was about to become Queen of England. When Charlotte arrived in England in 1761 for her wedding, people noticed her appearance immediately. These weren't hostile accounts from enemies of the crown. These were observations from people within the royal circle itself. Sir Walter Scott, one of Britain's most famous writers, didn't mince words. He described her as having a true mulatto face. Think about that, a mulatto face. That is not ambiguous language. Another key witness was the royal physician, Baron Christian Friedrich Stockmar. He knew the royal family personally and wrote in his diaries that Charlotte was small and crooked, with a true mulatto face. There's that word again, mulatto, a specific term used in the 18th and 19th centuries to describe people of mixed African and European ancestry. Even Queen Victoria's own personal physician later noted her grandmother's Negro physiognomy. But here's the most damning evidence, the portraits themselves. If you look at Charlotte's earliest portraits, painted by respected artists like Alan Ramsay in 1761 and 1762, right after she became queen. Her features are unmistakable. Ramsay, who was a famous abolitionist, painted what he saw: a woman with a broader nose, fuller lips, a darker skin tone, and a facial structure that clearly shows African ancestry. But then, something changes as decades pass and different artists paint the queen. Her features gradually become more Europeanized. Her nose gets narrower, her lips get thinner, her skin gets lighter. By the time you reach her later portraits, you would never guess these were paintings of the same woman. This wasn't just art evolving. This was historical revisionism painted in oil on canvas. You commission new portraits that make her look more European. You stop mentioning the Portuguese ancestry. You dismiss anyone who points out her features as being rude or scandalous. And most importantly, you make sure this truth never makes it into the official historical record. But why would they do this? The answer lies in the massive problem Britain was facing in the late 1700s. The abolition movement was gaining strength. People were starting to question the morality of slavery. Activists like Olaudah Equiano and Ottobah Cugoano, black men who had survived slavery and learned to write, were publishing devastating first-hand accounts of the slave trade's horrors. Britain's response was to double down on racist pseudoscience. They needed to justify slavery, so they created an entire intellectual framework claiming that black people were biologically inferior. Scientists published books arguing that Africans were a separate, lesser species. Philosophers wrote treatises claiming black people lacked souls. Artists created racist caricatures that dehumanized African features. Now, imagine the British establishment's nightmare scenario. Their own queen, the symbol of the empire, has African blood. The woman who sits beside King George III, who births 15 children including future kings, and who becomes the grandmother of Queen Victoria, carries the very ancestry they're claiming makes people subhuman. It's an impossible contradiction. How do you justify enslaving millions of Africans while your own monarchy has African blood? How do you publish scientific racism claiming black people are inferior when your queen is literally related to them? You can't, so you erase it. The erasure was so successful that for over 2 centuries, the story was forgotten by mainstream history. Then in the 20th century, it began to resurface. In 1940, a black American historian named J.A. Rogers published a book called Sex and Race, where he explicitly identified Queen Charlotte as having African ancestry. The British establishment ignored him completely. He was dismissed as a fringe theorist, pushing black nationalist propaganda. Then, in 1999, PBS aired a documentary called Frontline, the blurred racial lines of famous families, which investigated Charlotte's ancestry. They brought in genealogists. They traced her family tree back through those 9 generations to Margarita de Castro y Sousa. They connected her to the Moorish nobility of Portugal. The evidence was substantial. The British response: silence. The royal family made no comment. Most British historians dismissed it as speculation, and mainstream history books continued teaching that the British monarchy was purely European, with no African heritage. Here's where modern science could enter the story. In the 21st century, we have DNA testing. We can trace genetic ancestry with remarkable accuracy, and multiple geneticists have now stated that, based on the genealogical records, Queen Charlotte almost certainly had African ancestry. The definitive proof, of course, would be a DNA test of her remains, but the royal family won't authorize it. The British establishment won't definitively acknowledge her ancestry. The textbooks still don't teach it. Why? Because admitting Queen Charlotte was black means admitting something even more uncomfortable. The entire British royal family has been of African descent for over 250 years, even as the British Empire was enslaving, colonizing, and claiming the biological inferiority of African people across the globe. The woman presiding over this entire racist, imperial system, Queen Victoria, was the granddaughter of a black queen. She carried African blood while her empire enslaved African people. She benefited from a racist ideology while being part of the group that ideology claimed was inferior. The hypocrisy is staggering. This brings us to the modern era, when Prince Harry married Meghan Markle, a biracial American woman with black heritage. The British tabloids attacked her viciously. With racism that was barely coded, they called her exotic. They criticized her looks. They treated her as an outsider, contaminating the pure British royal family. But Meghan wasn't bringing black ancestry into the royal family for the first time. It was already there. It had been there for 250 years. Prince Harry was already of partial African descent through his great-great-great-great-grandmother, Queen Charlotte. Their children are simply continuing a heritage that had never actually left. The entire racist backlash against Meghan Markle was based on a lie, the lie that the royal family was purely white European. The lie that had been maintained through centuries of painted portraits, rewritten histories, and deliberate erasure. This is why this story matters beyond just one queen. Queen Charlotte's story is proof of something much larger. That racial categories are social constructs, not biological facts. She was considered European enough to marry a king, but she carried the same African ancestry that was used to justify enslaving millions. The difference wasn't genetic, it was political. Her story proves that the racial hierarchies used to justify colonialism and slavery were always about power, never about biology. And it proves that black history isn't a separate subject to be taught during 1 month a year. It's human history, it's royal history, it's world history. It's woven throughout. It's in the royal bloodlines, it's in the genetic code. It's everywhere, even where it was most violently erased. So who is the last black queen of England? The truth is, that title belongs to the late Queen Elizabeth II, who died in 2022. Carrying the same African ancestry that Charlotte brought into the royal line. But that's not the full answer. The real answer is there never was a last black queen, because the British establishment never acknowledged there was a first one. They successfully erased Queen Charlotte's African heritage from the official record, but erasure isn't the same as non-existence. Charlotte was real, her ancestry was real, and that heritage continues in every living descendant of the British royal family today. The story survived because truth has a way of persisting. The portraits still exist, the genealogical records are still there, and the descendants of people who knew the truth kept telling the story, even when no one wanted to listen. The next time someone tells you that black people have no history, remember Queen Charlotte. Remember that African blood runs through the veins of British royalty. Remember that the same empire that claimed racial superiority was ruled by a mixed-race queen. Remember that history is written by the powerful, but truth is written in genetics and portraits, in documents they forgot to destroy, and in the memories of people who refused to forget. Queen Charlotte's story is a powerful reminder that history is never as simple as it seems. It's a complex tapestry woven with threads of power, politics, and secrets. If this hidden chapter of history fascinated you and made you want to look a little closer at the stories we've been told, please consider hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who loves history as much as you do. And for more deep dives into the stories that time forgot, make sure you subscribe to The Sleeping Historian. Your support helps me uncover more incredible tales just like this one. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep questioning history.